Hey everyone, Cody here, and today I want to talk about Romans 12:1 and kind of this link between sacrifice and worship. This video is coming about because last night I got super tired out of nowhere, and what that tends to mean is that it's kind of God telling me to go to sleep because he's going to wake me up early. And I say that because this has happened multiple times, and everyone, including my wife and God, know that I hate waking up early. You know, especially on the weekend, I try to sleep in until at least 8 o'clock, which isn't super late, but at least 8, probably 9 if I can on Saturdays, because I'm not an early bird, never have been. So last night that happened to me, just got super fatigued out of nowhere. And I even called it. I told my wife, I was like, man, I just got super tired. That probably means that God's going to wake me up early. Sure enough, I was up at like 4:30 this morning, and that was my cue to go spend time with God. So I went in the living room and spent some time in prayer. And out of that, God gave me the idea to do a video based on Romans 12:1, and specifically about life being an act of sacrifice, and out of that being an act of worship. So I'm going to talk about it real quick. I've got some notes. So I'm going to read off Romans 12:1. This is all NIV. So if you use something else, that's fine. Also, it's really windy outside, so I don't know if you'll hear that in the video, but I'm just throwing that out there. Okay, so Romans 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Now, we've probably all heard this verse many times. If you've been a Christian for any length of time, you've probably heard this verse. And it's easy to gloss over it. You're just like, okay, yeah, we got to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. But what does that really mean? And this actually this verse comes up to me a lot, like just out of nowhere. So I wanted to talk about it. Now, if we look at the past, in the Old Testament, they sacrificed animals for multiple different reasons, but they were all offerings to God. The biggest one being the sin offering. And when Jesus came, you know, he was the perfect sacrifice. So because he was the perfect sacrifice, we no longer had to, well, I say we, but the Jews no longer had to sacrifice animals, because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice. And he was human, so his blood being shed on the cross, it totaled out the debt for everyone else. Because before that, the animals could never truly wash away the sins, and people would just continue to do them over and over again, because yes, you're making the sacrifice of the animal, but you yourself were not making that sacrifice. Well, once Jesus came, you know, he basically fulfilled that debt, and so he was the perfect sin offering, and because of that, we no longer need to make sacrifices. So in this, Paul is telling us to basically become living sacrifices. And out of that, it's worship to God. It's an act of worship to God. So, you know, they kind of go hand in hand. And I want to talk about the sacrifice. So essentially, you know, what does that look like for us to be living sacrifices? Well, we kind of have an idea of this when we make sacrifices in things like giving or tithing, or when we make worship, you know, when we tend to worship through like music or, you know, through praying. These are all kind of interlinked, because if we're worshiping, then we're making the sacrifice of, you know, maybe time or energy or effort or money, whatever, or, you know, some kind of resource. You know, that making the sacrifice is the act of worship, but also vice versa, because when you worship God, you're making a sacrifice of something. So they're interlinked, right? So making the sacrifice is the worship, and by worshiping, you tend to make a sacrifice. So they go hand in hand. And so we know a lot of kind of just the general things of worship, you know, where we sing or pray or, you know, whatever, or when we make those sacrifices, and in turn they are acts of worship. But let's go a bit broader than that. You know, what does it look like to make your body a living sacrifice? Because that would in essence mean that it's not just a one-time thing, that we are to make our whole life an act of worship, and out of that we would make sacrifices. So while I was praying about this and the idea came to me, a couple of different subjects or areas kind of came to mind. So the first one is marriage. if you're in a relationship, but especially married, you make sacrifices for your spouse. And in essence, we are to, for wives are supposed to submit to their husbands, but also husbands are supposed to respect and love their wives, just as, Christ loves the church. So, we are called to look out for each other. We pray, we show each other love, but we also make those sacrifices. Philippians 2:4 tells us not to look just to our own interests, but to the interests of others. And 1 Corinthians 10:24 actually pushes that even further, saying to not look at our own interests, but the interests of others. And in marriage, this is especially true. Now, one thing that my wife and I do that I really like is that, we'll pray in the mornings before the morning gets kind of set off. We'll actually pray. And we've been doing this for years. But we also have been reading books together. We'll read the Bible or read a certain book and then talk about that. And I think that all of these things are acts of worship, by making those sacrifices for my wife so that, she is in a good spot. I'm worshiping God. But also when we worship God together, we are making the sacrifice of time or, of energy to worship God. So again, they're interlinked. These ideas of worship and sacrifice go hand in hand. Parenting is a huge one, right? Proverbs 22:6 tells you that if you raise up a child in the way they should go, they won't depart from it. And again, if there is ever a thing that you have to make sacrifices for, it's your children. And parenting is probably the toughest job, at least for me, ever, right? Parenting is super tough. And yes, we have a lot of kids, so maybe that plays into it. But in essence, like, parenting is way harder for me personally than marriage is. And that's not always the case for everyone. Everybody has their I guess, cross to bear, I would say. But essentially, parenting is a huge, huge sacrifice. You're literally raising up another human being for at least 18 years. But, they don't really just go away after 18. They still need love and support. So, it's all, again, but in training them up and teaching them, biblical ways and taking care of them and showing them love and doing the things that we're called to do, not only for our kids, but for other people, for our kids, you are honoring God. You're making the sacrifice and worshiping God at the same time. One thing that my wife and I have incorporated, and we've been doing pretty good with this, at least once a week, since the year started, we've been doing a Bible study with our kids. So we have a family reading Bible. We read the section and then we ask them questions and get them involved. And it's been really good. And even if we don't want to do it, even if we're frustrated with each other or we're, upset with something that happened in the day, we force ourselves to sit down, do a worship song, and then read the Bible together. And it's actually been really good because even if we don't want to do it, when we go into it, by the time we're actually reading the Bible and talking about it, everybody's kind of engaged. So it's been really good. And making that sacrifice is an act of worship to God. So again, hand in hand. Work is probably, we spend at least a third of our lives at work. And, it's probably more for a lot of people. And essentially, it's one of probably our overlooked areas of serving God, worshiping God. Well, how can we worship God through our work? Through the sacrifices we make in being Christian and setting, kind of a standard. Because there are certain areas in this that I have highlighted. The first is honesty. Proverbs 12:22 tells us that the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who tell the truth. So, he wants us to deal honestly with other people. And being at work, that, it can be easy to, cut corners or to deceive people to get a better position in the company or to get things favorable for us at work, because we're there for so long. It can be a slippery slope. And I've dealt with that in the past where I've done the things that I should not have done. Maybe I was stealing company time. Maybe I was stealing literal products from the company. Maybe I was, telling my boss one thing, but doing another. All of those things were, lying. And I was not, it was not an act of worship to God because I wasn't making the sacrifice, because dealing honestly is tougher than doing whatever it takes to really just look out for yourself. The next is putting in a full effort. I have met so many people over the years that just do a minimal effort, and they think that, well, I'm just, the company's taking advantage of me, so I'm going to extract as much as I can from the company while giving so little in return. And this is opposite of what God wants from us. This is the opposite of the kingdom theology, that we just pour ourselves out and we may not even get anything, because our goal is not to get. Our goal should be to give, just as Jesus gave his life, as a ransom for many. He came knowing that he was going to do that. He didn't want anything out of it. He didn't want money. He didn't want the accolades. He didn't want to be, this king that they were trying to set him up as. No, he came to give his life as a ransom for many. So, we should be putting in the full effort. Colossians 3:23 says that we should be working with a full heart. Basically, we should be giving it our all, because we're not working for human masters. We're working for God. And essentially, if you put it in that perspective, everything that you do, that you put your hands to, is for God, not for your boss. You may not like your boss. You may not like your company. So what? You're not working for those people. You're working for God. So we should be giving our all the time. Now, I understand some days are easier than others, or sometimes you slack off. Okay, that's fine. We're going to have those days. But in essence, in general, we should be putting in a full effort, because that's what honors God. And it takes the sacrifice of going the extra mile to really, set ourselves apart. The last one for work is just having a good attitude and not complaining. Philippians 2:14 says, do everything without complaining or grumbling. Look, I get it. Work can be tough. We all have our struggles at work with people or the job itself or things that are expected of us. Yeah, that's going to happen no matter where you go. I've found that there is no grass is greener situation. Now, yes, some situations can be better than others. I'm not saying that there aren't toxic situations, or there aren't unfair situations, or there aren't, abuse, or, maybe you're being taken advantage of. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. But in essence, the majority of the time is, if you just leave one opportunity to go to another, you're going to have challenges there. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. And so you will always have challenges one way or another, no matter where you work. And we should have a good attitude about it. And that right there is a sacrifice, because I know that it can be challenging to, be happy when it feels like, your work is kind of caving in on you. I understand that. I really do. I've had those moments where I was in a depression because I felt like I would never get out of the hole I was in at work. But the truth is we're lucky. We're lucky to even have work to bless our hands, to pay bills, to take care of our family, or to put our hands to earn an honest wage. We're lucky. And I'm not saying it's easy, but that's the whole point, right? We're not working for God. We're not working for this company. We're not working for people or the company. We're working for God. So essentially, making that sacrifice of having a good attitude about your work, and really just kind of being grateful that you can even have a job when a lot of people are out of work or struggling. It's like, okay, we're making that sacrifice, and that is an act of worship. Next is hobbies. I'm not going to go too deep into hobbies, but essentially, 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Okay, once again, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Do it for the glory of God. So if you have a hobby or you have time off that you're not, at work, obviously we don't want to sin, but even in that, where you're not sinning, just glorify God. Make that an act of worship. Spend time with God. And even if it's not time with God and it's something you want to do, just still bring it to God as an offering to really just, to make him proud. Hey, God, I know this is something that I want to do, but you've given me, this time and ability to be able to do this thing. And I'm just so grateful to even be allowed to do this, to have this time. And I just put this time before you as an offering. Lastly is just relationships in general. We're called to do a lot of things. We're called to love, to forgive, to give freely, to be patient, humility, bear each other's burdens, all of these things. And what do all of these things require? They require sacrifice. You got it. I know I didn't ask, but it's sacrifice. That was the answer. Sorry, what was the answer? Oh, it's sacrifice. Okay. So loving obviously requires sacrifice. Forgiveness, huge, huge for me, especially in the past, that requires sacrifice. You have to let go of those feelings. So it's literally sacrifice. Giving freely. You know, I've helped people have helped me over the years. And that takes a sacrifice to give up your time or your energy or your money or your resources to somebody who needs it more than you. It's a sacrifice, but that's the whole point. When you do that and you don't expect anything in return, you're doing it because you want to bless them. It's worship to God. Lastly, you know, being patient and bearing each other's burdens. What's harder than bearing other people's burdens? That's tough, man. But at the same time, it blesses them and it blesses God. And being patient, patience requires sacrifice, because patience means not doing the thing that your flesh wants you to do, but doing the right thing that would honor God. So ultimately, that's pretty much it for this video. I guess I never really linked those two things together before God kind of put it, you know, in my mind last night, or this morning, sorry, that, you know, sacrifice and worship kind of go together, and out of sacrifice comes worship. So that's pretty much it. That's all I've got. I hope this video made sense and, you know, will bless somebody. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I will see you guys in some other one. Take care.